All right, so this is the intro to what I call 17. It is a game based loosely on blackjack, which I don't know if everybody knows what blackjack is, but it is a card game with playing cards where you try to get to your card values add up to 21 without going over. That's the basic rules. And blackjack has some more complex rules than that. We're not using all of the complexity of blackjack. Um, and it looks something like this. Not this. Um, Close all this other stuff out, the other versions. So this is what my demo of it looks like. So title over here, your account here, like your wallet here, and I also have like how many cards are left in the deck. So there's an abbreviated deck. There's no face cards, so no jacks, kings, or queens in the deck. So there's not as many cards as in a full deck. So it's just the number cards and the ace. And this is how many slots there are. If you kind of do the math, you'll never exceed this many based on there being you adding up to 17. So you play against the dealer. It's just one player against the dealer, and so you make a wager. So you can bet up to 500, and if you win, you win what you wager. If you lose, you lose it. So I'm just gonna bet, and I have some sound effects in here too, so I'll show you how that works. So I'm just gonna bet all 500, and I'm gonna hit the new button. You'll see that this new button is activated, and these are disabled. The stand and hit buttons are disabled. And then at the bottom, there's some instructions that kind of tell you how this works. So I have a little card sound, not super sophisticated, that plays when the cards play. So when the dealer is dealt cards, there's a hidden card, and then there is the visible card, and it totals up just the visible cards for the dealer. So the dealer has 7, your player has 9. So I'm gonna hit the hit button because I'm likely to not go over. Going over is called bust. So I'm likely to not go over 17. And an ace can be either 1 or 11. So in this case, we're going to count it as 10. So I have exactly 17, so I'm going to probably win this. So I'm going to hit stand. And so I won, so I got 1,000 on here. Okay. So when I win, I'm highlighting the loser with red and the winner with green. Okay. And so then when the round is over, I disable the stand and hit buttons again and enable the new during the game. That swaps. That behavior swaps. Okay. So, any questions about anything on the screen right now before I delve into what we have going on? Okay. So I'm going to show you the HTML first. This is going to be different to HTML than what we've looked at in the past. So for this project, we are not using Bootstrap. We're going to use a CSS property called CSS Grid. There are excellent tools that are resources for CSS Grid. If you just punch in CSS Grid into a search engine, I'm using DuckDuckGo, but if you use Google, these first two things are going to probably show up for you as well. CSS Tricks has an excellent guide, and W3 Schools has an excellent guide. Those are probably going to be the first two things that show up. The CSS Tricks complete guide is really a complete guide. It's pretty exhaustive and goes through all of the properties. That's probably a little much. The W3 Schools intro is a little simpler and baby steps you through it a little bit. So it explains it a little simpler. What I'm using Grid for is even simpler yet. So hopefully this makes some sense to you. So CSS Grid, in a nutshell, allows us to use regular markup in HTML. We don't have to do anything special with our HTML. We do everything in CSS. Okay, so I'm going to just collapse the head. The only thing different about our head here is we're not including Bootstrap. So So I'm just going to get that out of the way. So if I look at the HTML here, I don't have any Bootstrap classes at all. I just have IDs. Okay. So this is it for the HTML. Okay. For the major parts. Okay. I have some blank places for the cards that I collapsed here too. But as far as the grid goes, this is what we're looking at. Okay. So we have to do a display grid in CSS for the game board, and then our grid elements are going to be these: the H1, the H3, H3, H2, div, 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 div. Okay. So, and then the only other thing on here is I included the sound files that I'm using in the bottom. So if you want to play MP3s on your web page, all you have to do is include them in here. I'll show you how to play them in JavaScript. If you just want to have them on a web page, you just have to add the keyword controls into here. And if I just hit save here and I go back to my HTML and I refresh and I scroll to the bottom, that MP3 will be here. Okay. So it's as easy as that. Okay. So any questions about anything in the HTML? That should be all stuff we've kind of looked at before, but feel free to ask questions. Anybody wondering why anything is how it looks at all? Yeah.
What is that little three dots? That's actually...
Oh, this just means it's collapsed. So this is line 22 and it jumps to 36. So this is just saying there's a bunch of lines missing there. Yeah, that's just an Atom thing. Good question. Yeah. And if anybody isn't familiar with this little piece here, the ampersand NBSP, this represents a space character, a non-breaking space it's called. And I just put this in to hold the place for the H3 so it doesn't collapse and disappear. So that if we have content to put in here through JavaScript, it holds the place there in the HTML. Okay. So anything that's actually blank, but we want to eventually put some JavaScript content in there, I usually put non-breaking spaces in there.
Is there it seems like in a similar situation you use placeholder?
So I use a placeholder. I use placeholder image, like a placeholder image for images. Yeah.
You're not using it the same.
Yeah. So this is just where I put text. Maybe like text would go in here otherwise. So this would be like well. So in this case, cards left is going to be a number. So like there might be like 30 cards left. So JavaScript will replace that with a number. Okay. Good questions. Awesome. All right, so let's jump into the CSS since that's actually going to be new this time. So I'm importing from Google Fonts again. I have two different fonts I'm using for the title. I just have a weird script font, and then I have a special font for these headlines too. Nothing particularly fancy, just did them to do them. And then I'm breaking the CSS up into two parts just with a comment. Nothing particularly important about this. You can kind of do your CSS in any order. So I'm just kind of breaking out the top part to be the layout section, and then scroll down, and this bottom part is styling. So color and font information I'm putting on the bottom, and all the stuff about the layout I'm putting at the top. Okay. That's kind of arbitrary. You don't have to do it that way. You can mix and match. It's really entirely up to you how you want to organize things, but sometimes having some kind of an organizational theory behind this stuff is helpful. In general, I try to go like outside to inside and top to bottom as I go down too. But again, as long as you're kind of following the rules of the cascade in CSS, if it works, it doesn't matter. Okay, the order does. As long as it works, it really doesn't matter what order you go in. So that said, I'm going to kind of just go down here to where I define my game board, And so one thing you'll notice is I'm not using grid by default, okay? And I'm going to demonstrate that. And that's because I'm defining the mobile view as the default. So if we shrink this down, by default, this is not using grid, it's just stacking these elements up, okay? And I'm going to get rid of that MP3 at the bottom. So it's just stacking these divs up. So these appear just as they do in the HTML. So this is the H1, this I think is an H2, H3, whatever. And then the dealer score div, the player score, and so on, okay? So these are just stacked right on top of each other, just as they appear in the HTML. Nothing, no fancy styling at all, okay? And then what we're using are called media queries. And then we're setting some breakpoints. So as I stretch this, we hit a breakpoint right around here, right there, okay? So at 800 pixels, as soon as it hits 800 pixels, a minimum of 800 pixels, then this new layout kicks in, okay? So that's right here. So as soon as it's a minimum width of 800 pixels, then we're applying this grid layout, okay? And there's a few different ways you can define a grid. The first thing, you always have to say display grid. So the display property can be a lot of different things, like it could be any of these items. So you can do flex, block, inline flex, inline grid, inline block. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can define your display. Sometimes we do display none to hide things. So display is a very common CSS property. But in this case, we're doing display grid. Okay, so we're defining the fact that we're going to turn on these grid properties down below. Okay, that's basically what this means. And then all we're doing is defining our grid. So in this grid display grid is kind of a new CSS property. This didn't exist a few years ago. So that's really the reason why Bootstrap even exists, is because this wasn't a thing you could do up until pretty recently. So what we get to do here is we get to just define regions, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying put the title and the wallet in the first row, okay? So we'll see title, wallet, first row. On the second row, message and the cards header in the second row. And then the dealer information, I'm taking up two columns here on the third row. Okay. Same thing with the player, and then so on and so forth down the line. Okay. The controls takes up the full thing. The wager takes up the full thing. Yes.
So when you're trying to take more than one column, you mentioned the same item to like.
Yeah. Yep. So pretty straightforward.
Take like 3 columns, would you say 3 times?
Yeah. Yep. And in fact, that's what we do down here. So I'm switching to 4 columns instead of 2 down below. Okay. So when we hit a 1200 pixels, we're going to switch to 4 columns. Okay. What am I in? Thought I was in this. Yeah. So when I stretch this out even more, now it's 4 columns. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2. So we'll see controls, wager, player. Okay. So you have tons of flexibility, and you can totally just reconfigure everything. And in fact, we could reconfigure things and move like dealer up to the top here. You could do some completely crazy things with this. Okay. But we're keeping things really, really pretty simple here. Okay. So you can have some really very, very flexible control of what you want to do with your layouts here. But I'm keeping it pretty simple, but you can do something much more advanced. Okay. So I'm doing this instead of Bootstrap. Okay. And if you want to, if you're like, this is crazy, I don't understand any of this, and you want to redo this and use Bootstrap, have at it. That's totally fine. No problem there. Okay. Okay. So then the only other thing of note here, I think everything else we talked about before. So I'm using these classes here, winner, loser, and hidden. So these are set in the JavaScript. So when the winner is determined, then I have a border and a shadow around the cards for the winner and the loser. So green one for the winner, red one for the loser. And I also when the cards are not displayed, I set the visibility to hidden. So the cards are still there, they're just not visible. Okay, so that's what visibility hidden is, which is different than display none. Display none will actually take them out of the document and can sometimes collapse your document. We don't want that to happen. We want to maintain the structure of the document. So I'm using visibility hidden. So it's there, it's just invisible. Okay. And when I set my buttons to disabled, I'm making them 20% opacity. Okay, so that happens when, like, these are 20% opacity. So I don't think I talked too much about that, but like if we play with the opacity, I can make this like 0.8, and these will be more clear. I can make these like 0.02, and they'll be really just about invisible. You probably can't even see them on the screen there. Okay. So 0.2 seemed like a good number there. I think that is just about it. Okay. Any questions about any of the CSS? Hopefully that was pretty easy. There was two other notes on this. So as far as the grids, so we have to actually define these items. Okay. So title, wallet, message, cards head. You probably assume, which I wish was correct, that these are just IDs, right? That would be great if this would default to using the IDs. But what you end up having to do is define them. So you have to define a grid area as controls. So controls is controls, wager is wager. Some of them are not exactly the same. So I defined cards header as cards head, just to keep it a little shorter. Wallet message is message. Okay, so I defined all these areas that way. And then I'm also using I'm setting up the player and the dealer as a grid within a grid. So I'm using grid again for the cards. These cards are in another grid, just a simple like 2-row grid. Okay, so in this case, I just have the grid is going to be there's going to be 10 items, and they're going to be 9% wide each, and they're going to have a 1% width gap in between them. Okay, so if you look at these are 9% of the width of the container that they're in. Each of these is 9% wide, and there's 1% in between them. Okay, and that's not super great. You could probably play with it so that this doesn't end up being this margin on the end here isn't different than this one, if that bothers you. Yes.
Is there another way to define the space between them? besides
Well,
setting?
yeah, you can use anything there. So you could say like 9M. You can use any settings you want there. Okay, or 90 pixels. So you can play with those however you want. You could also put this. You could put this cell section into a media query. So if you wanted to set it to a certain pixel size based on the screen resolution, and then have it be a certain pixel size, and then when the screen gets to a certain size, have it jump to a different pixel size, you could do that. You're the programmer. You can totally do that, and that's totally valid to adjust that. Okay. Great question. Yeah. So this is the other way of defining the grids. You can do it with labels, or you can just set up kind of a pattern like that. Okay, and there are like other variations on these two ways of doing things, but like this seems like the two easiest ways to kind of define things, right? Just like a repeating pattern, or just kind of take control of it and label everything. Those seem like the two easiest ways to me. Okay, so that I think is everything in the CSS. Okay, now the JavaScript. Actually, in this case, the JavaScript probably has the least amount of new stuff. Although there's kind of a new thing right out of the gate. So we're going to use kind of go full force into more object-oriented programming in this. I'm gonna just kind of collapse this real quick. So let's go down here. So in our program here, we have a card game like this really suits itself to object-oriented programming because we have a game. You could consider that to be an object. And object-oriented programming might sound fancy or something, I don't know. But it really is just a way of modeling real-life ideas into something that you can deal with in the computer. So you're bundling the properties of the thing along with the actions that you can perform using the thing, right? So we have the game itself, so that's going to have some properties and some actions. The deck is just the deck of cards. So the deck of cards is it's part of the game, and then the a single card itself is a thing. Okay, so the game is going to contain all this other stuff, and we see that down below here. So this is where things kind of start. So we create a game, and we're using. Oh, whoops! I did a search wrong place and didn't catch one there. So. So we're using this let keyword here, and instead of var, and that is because newer versions of JavaScript allow us to use let instead of var to change the scope rules of our variables. Okay, so in JavaScript, when you use a var, that means that if we defined a variable inside of a function anywhere, it has function scope. Okay, so here we have a function. Okay, and this function goes all the way down here. I mean, this function goes all the way down to here. Okay, or down to here, I should say. Okay, so this function here goes all the way down here. If we defined a variable inside this if, that variable would have scope within this whole function. That might be what we want. And so then we would use var to define that variable. But typically, when in most languages, things have block scope. And so you would want it defined within these curly braces. So you want that variable defined within that block of code. And a block is just whatever's in between curly braces. Okay? So JavaScript just tended to be different than other programming languages. It created a lot of confusion. So now the kind of the trend is to use let because it just kind of follows the convention that other programming languages use. So that's all. I mean, and the other thing is, like, I didn't rely on that at all for any of the variables that I used one way or the other. So it didn't impact anything. So it's not a change in terms of functionality. You could swap these all out for var and it would work identically, but it could create different situations for you. So anyway, that's the difference. I kind of re-explained that up at the top here. So that is that. So all right. So we have our game. We create the game. We run our just 4 things to get started. We have a little setup method. Button set just highlights the new button and disables the hit and stand buttons, changes the game message to start a new game, and it updates the wallet. Okay, so it kind of initializes the wallet. So and I think I'm gonna give you most of this code. You're gonna have to fill in a couple of the methods. So I'll go through some of this stuff, but you're gonna have to fill in some of these things as it goes. So if we look at game, we're gonna use the deck from up above. We're gonna have a hand, the dealer hand. It's gonna be an array of cards. Player hand is gonna be an array of cards. I'm using the by queue helper function that I'm defining way up on top. And by queue is just like the by ID that I defined before, but it lets you use any CSS selector as your your item. So this is just like running by ID. And then we're just initializing some variables. We're creating our object. This is just like the other projects that we worked on. And this is the button set. We just pass it a Boolean value. So if it's true, then we set things up this way. If it's false, we swap those. Okay. So we disable the wager field, enable the wager field, and set up the buttons the way they're supposed to be set up. Okay. This sets up the set winner, handles the switch in the green and the red for the cards. This is the method to actually deal a card and checks to see if a new deck needs to be dealt. So it actually keeps track of how many cards are in the deck. If you could handle that potentially differently. I wanted to make sure that we're not like just randomly dealing cards. We're dealing with real decks as we go. This is the, there's a start round. Kind of recreates everything. Let's see. I call start round right away. Yeah, so start round is when you hit the new button. So wanted to show game message, update wallet. So those are pretty straightforward. Update wallet is kind of interesting. Where is that? Oh, update wallet's way up on top. That's right. So update wallet is a global function because the wallet lasts outside of the game. So every time you create a new game, it creates a new game. It has to create a new game object and destroys the old one. So the wallet has to exist beyond that. So it's not part of game. The wallet is a global variable and a global function that works on that. So that's why this is up here. And uses some fancy logic to determine whether it's positive or negative, and then either removes or adds money to your wallet. And this is how we play the sound. If we want to have a sound effect play, it just we grab the ID of the MP3 and we just go dot play. Okay, so yes.
Where do you get this?
That's a great question. Yeah. So in this case, I actually sort of made them. I got like the basic MP3s and then I added them. But let's see. So free, non-copyright. Let's see. What's the word I want? Not royalty free. Royalty free. I want royalty free MP3 files. And then the site that I was using was I thought it was right on here. This one, I think. Yeah, so there's Sound Bible. It's a weird name for a site, but so they have a lot of sound effects. So you can just like play stuff, like all sorts of just weird, random, crazy stuff. And a lot of them, they'll say, you can have it with attribution. Some of them are just like public domain. So I tried to keep things to public domain, and then I edited them anyway. So in some cases, like they were higher pitched or played faster or slower than I wanted, so I edited the files. So I would get public domain things just to be on the safe side if you can. But you can search here for things that you want. Yeah, the main thing is you want to follow the rules of the license that whatever you get. Okay. So. All right, let's see, what else did I want to highlight in here? Oh, so yeah, so the sounds, when we pull in the sounds, I have those actually right here. So I'm just like we selected any other element. I'm just grabbing it by ID. So we had those audio tags, if you recall, at the bottom here. So I have the ID here for like, well, coin sound is the one we were looking at before. So coin sound, I grab that by ID, and then if we want to play that, then we just go coin sound dot play. So it's kind of stupid easy. So I think that is most of the stuff in the game. And deck is much easier. So deck is just an array of cards. It has a shuffle method. It's the super simplest shuffle algorithm. Not very efficient. It simply goes through every card for each. So it goes through every single card and switches it randomly with another card in the deck. It's guaranteed to give you a random distribution of cards, but it's not the fastest algorithm. So if we had 1,000,000 cards, we would have to do 1,000,000 operations. It's not guaranteed to be the best, but it's good enough for what we're doing. We have a deal method on there. So this deals a card off the top of the deck, which just uses the built-in array.pop, but also updates the display right away. So that's in there, which is something you might not even want because that's kind of not necessary to the game at all. So you could take that out if you wanted to. And then it has a create. So it just, all it does is it goes through the array of the full suit list, the full num list. So it has a nested for each here. So you have you go through the suits, and then inside the suits, you go through all the numbers, and then you just create a new card and you push it onto the cards array. So it looks really complicated, but it's actually kind of simple when it gets right down to it. And that is the deck. So that's actually really easy stuff. And then the player, not the player, the cards. There's no player. Card is even easier yet. The card just has a number and a suit. We don't need to do anything complicated because we're not dealing with jacks, kings, and queens. So we don't have to deal with having we don't have to have a point value and the number be separate. Those could be the same because we're just having ace be 1. We don't have to deal with like what is a jack, king, and queen. Why are those all 10 and any of that? There's a function to find the images, and you'll notice that there's a card images folder, and things are laid out as like C1.png is going to be the ace of clubs, C2 is going to be the 2 of clubs, H6 is going to be the H is hearts, 6 is 6. Okay. So you can, of course, and you probably should change all those to whatever you want those to be. Don't have to use my cards. And that is really it. Okay. So that's all that the card function does. Okay. That's all the card object is about. So, I think that's really everything that's complicated. So any questions about anything I should go over that I went too fast on? Yeah. Yeah. So the number of cards is actually determined completely by this because it goes through this whole list. So it goes through the suit, the full suit list. So it starts with clubs, it goes to the spades, hearts, diamonds. So it goes through the clubs, club 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It counts to 8, then does the spades, the hearts, the diamonds. So it gets all of those. So there's going to be 48 cards total. Okay. So that's the total number, but we don't even have to know that. Like if we added a 9th card, we don't have to do anything else with the program to let that happen. Okay. Which is kind of nice. It might screw up the rules a little bit where the game would be even less fun. Not a very fun game. I have no delusions that this is not a fun game, but, yeah. So yeah, the other thing is, I think I used constants before, but I don't know how much I talked about those. So I have actual constants in here. These are variables that don't ever vary. They don't change. So these are things that are set, and they're typically get done in all caps. So these are things that, like, we could have a const number of cards, right? And we could set that to 48 if we had a reason to reference that, right? So that, that could be something that you'd want to do. But I do have some things used for double checking that probably aren't even necessary. So we have the dealer stand at 10. So if the dealer has more than 10 or more, then the dealer doesn't add an additional card. Okay, so that's a way that tactically you can beat the dealer pretty consistently. So if you are pretty sure the dealer is gonna have 10 or more, you can base your decision on whether you're going to hit or not on that. The default wager is going to be $10. You run into that. If you try to bet 0, it's going to set your default to 10 instead of 0. The maximum number of cards is 10, and that is based on the fact that we have 10 slots here. Because that's all that fit on the screen when I did 9%. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Okay, so I have 500. So if I say 800, I have a message here. It says bid too high, wager now 500. That's a great question. So, and this is, so if I gave you my code and I wanted to find that, I would do a search for bid to. Okay, so this is handled in the start round function. Okay, so when I click that new button, that's where it's handled. Okay, and so all I'm doing is, if the player wager is less than 1, then I just say bid is too low. So you can bet as low as $1, but if it's too low, then it sets it to the default wager 10. Okay, and if it's greater than your wallet, then it sets a message too high, and it sets it equal to your player wallet. So that's all. It's not sophisticated. You could definitely do something better. Yeah. Awesome question. It's not magic. Very good. Yep. And should this all be handled in here? Could that be broken out into a separate function? Maybe. Yeah, that might be a good idea. Oh, yeah. One other quick thing. So I had to do this is kind of a weird hack that might be a little confusing. So when I am dealing the cards out in that same function, I'm doing too much in this start round function now. I should split that out a little bit. So when I'm actually dealing those first 4 cards, I am playing just one sound sample. I have the deal sound, and that actually plays this whole thing. Maybe. Why is it not playing? It's being weird. But anyway, it plays all. It's one MP3 that has the card sound. It just goes chunk, 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 chunk. It plays all 4 right away. And so what I had to do is, because the computer's really fast, I had to slow down the dealing of the cards. So I have it dealing a card, then it's waiting half a second between dealing the next card. Okay, so I have it waiting 5 seconds or half a second, then waiting another half second, and then waiting a half second before it deals the next one. Okay, and the way that JavaScript works is it's a little strange to understand, but these set timeouts all operate basically concurrently. So it runs this method and then it sets a timer and moves right on to the next thing. So it doesn't wait here. It sets a timeout and then it knows to come back to this and run this in the background. Okay, so you have to put different amounts here in order to give that separation. So it waits 500 milliseconds, so half a second, then it shows the first card. it waits a full second, shows the second card. It waits a second and a half, shows the first player card, and then waits 2 seconds to show the second player card. Okay, so that's this part. So when I hit new here, okay, so that fourth card, these are all done independently. It's not waiting for one to be done before it starts the next one. It's just waiting 2 seconds for that fourth one to go. So it's a little weird. JavaScript's a little weird that way. Yeah.
The seconds were the numbers that are there, the 2,000, 1,500.
Yeah.
Why is it like that?
Why is it 2,000 instead of 2?
Why is it like
Because computers are fast. Like it's so like the fastest you could go reasonably is like a millisecond. Yeah. And we, oftentimes you want to do things, you want to slow things down a little bit, but like a second is kind of a long time actually, right? So like you even notice, like you can see it happening then, right? So slowing things down by a half a second actually is kind of a lot. So it's nice to have that granularity. Probably overkill to have milliseconds, but it's like the next, if things are smaller than a second, we generally just go to milliseconds. Yeah. So computer clocks are generally measured in milliseconds. So in other languages, like in like Java or C, C++, like if you're reading the computer's clock, usually you're reading in milliseconds. So the computer clock is usually just based on milliseconds. So that's an awesome question. We could talk for a whole hour about time. Probably. Maybe not an hour. Yeah. Anybody have anything else? Good questions. It's your last chance for 2 weeks. Then we're going to forget all about this. We'll have to start all over. So I don't have the actual, because I'm probably going to change it a little bit, what I originally planned, partly because of what's going on. So I'm probably going to scale down what I was going to ask you guys to do. So I will get you guys a starting point on this code and get that uploaded possibly by tomorrow, maybe not until next week. You'll have plenty of time to work on it, though. So don't worry about necessarily working on it over break. And feel free to, contact me with any questions. If we want to get together that time after break, if the world does not come to an end, I am very flexible about meeting somewhere. Like meeting on campus is probably frowned upon, but like if anybody wants to meet at Starbucks or something like that, I'm always fine doing that. I'll buy you coffee. It's all good. The other class said, well, how many people can we fit into a Starbucks? So I don't know if they're all planning on going. But that's fine too. Like, I mean, that's totally fine with me. Like if you're sick, try not to infect anybody, but if things are fine, I think that's probably mostly fine. So, but I'm not a epidemiologist. I think that's what it's called. So I don't know. I'm not making any promises one way or the other if that's going to help or hurt. So, but I'm happy to help any way that I can. So online, offline, might try to do that YouTube live thing. So anyway, I can stop that.